All right, so good morning, everybody. So welcome to this session. So we're gonna start by sharing my screen. And I'm happy here with Justina to present today this workshop. Oh, sorry. Hi, Justina, can you start, please?
Yes, hello, Martin, and hello, everyone. It's really indeed our pleasure to have you in our session today, which is discussing how big data and specifically big data marketplaces can power transformation, digital transformation of Europe, European ecosystems, and specifically the SMEs. As you see today, we will have a lot of guests, very interesting EU-funded projects that have very interesting results and approaches to present to illustrate how this transformation is enabled through also research and innovation being done here in Europe. And me, myself, I represent European Digital SME Alliance. So indeed, for our companies and especially for technicians, for managers in the companies, I know that this session is specifically interesting to see this wider picture and to understand how the developments that we are doing here in our projects can actually help them in access to data and using data and powering the solutions that we are producing. So not speaking much, just to quickly tell to our participants that the session, as you know, is recorded. I think you received all the information upon your registrations, and please feel free to put any comments that you have when you are following the session. We will definitely try to answer any questions or concerns raised by you. And please note that once we are recording the session and you're writing comments, we see your names. So that's up to you to update that in the profiles if you want. So Martin, the floor is yours. Please introduce briefly the agenda and let's start with our session.
Sure. Thank you very much, Justina. So today we have prepared for you a very informative style because we have a panel of experts. I will start the kicking off the ice by breaking up the ice just by explaining what is the state of play in data platforms and focus also on this digital transformation issue because everybody's talking about that. Then we go in this kind of a dynamics of explaining what are the differences between these projects and what are the opportunities that we have for this digital transformation, supporting specifically SMEs. So we are really targeting the SME ecosystem in Europe, and nevertheless, it can be applicable for large industries, and we have our own use cases that exactly will be giving you some building blocks in this webinar or in this workshop. These three projects are collaborating at some point, and we are willing to share all these experiences by showing you how we have done the way our paths towards this digital transformation. So we have some examples as well, so practical examples on the application of our tools or our assets, and this will be presented by two large industries that we have presented today. And at the last, we will have some kind of a interactive session, so we will try to do it as dynamic as possible, and then we will give some Menti application for you to interact with us. And finally, we will just do a summary and a closing notes for everybody to take away. And hopefully you will enjoy and learn something today that we can start to interact in a later stage. So with no more preamble, so I will start with the first state of play. So as you know, digital transformation is kicking every sector. So started from the governments, starting from this smart city wave, and now it's reaching every single industry. So there are key aspects that motivates this. Obviously, the European Union's advocates that we want to go into these globalization markets. And then for that one, we need to have a single market, digital single market. And this implies digital services that also brings financial opportunities and new aspects in these digital single markets. However, this also kick very strong the digital education. And in here, we are obviously looking at these gaps or this digital divide that exists today. So the new generations are really into these digital services, digital transformation, but the old generations are not in this process. So that's why this education is important from a perspective of digital transformation. And last but not least, there are some priorities. Obviously, there are some priorities to really execute this digital transformation process. And then the first priority is digitizing the public services. So that's why these smart cities, these environments in cities are more relevant or even more easy to observe in terms of digital transformation. But as I mentioned before, every sector is now being touched by digital transformation. So what exactly means this digital transformation for enterprises, right? Because today we are focusing on these SMEs or this industrial sector. So obviously we need to have, or they need to have information catalogs, digitized. So we need to have some policies or compliance with some policies in the governance, and also some schemes that can help to this classification of the data more easy, right, or more accessible. And then we also need to have this kind of a navigation or collaboration tools, because digital transformation is about collaboration. It's about exchanging information, exchanging data. So all these elements are obviously together with some user experience and user interfaces. And today we are happy to discuss on this experience visualization applications, information graphs that some projects are developing for demonstrating this transformation. So there is a new initiative or a new approach that is has been discussed amongst partners, amongst projects, and is this big data stack. So the big data now is there. So big data is everywhere. Everybody's producing data. Sensors are producing data. Everybody has this notion in cities or rural areas that data is the oil of the 21st century. So now, how this data is built from sensors being collected, from virtual applications being produced this data, and how these management systems are getting into interoperability, and how this is going to be used for analytics and some visualization services on top of that. So this constitutes a new approach. So we can explain for long, but in here, you just need to understand that there is a new way to manipulate, process, and visualize and use this data, basically. The AI is one of these examples. As you can see here is on the top, AI services. So basically what we are doing is transforming this black box into open box. And now we can understand why this data is the main resource for these AI services. So it's just like I would call data continuum that in other sessions you will be hearing about this. Now, the current state is that there are no common European data spaces connected. There is a specification. There is many initiatives, and that's why you are here as well. The VDBA, the International Data Space Association, in collaboration, they have generated some sort of documents, some sort of specifications that can guide the European ecosystems. But in reality, data spaces has emanated, marketplaces has emanated as a single demand, and they are not really interconnected. But then the philosophy of these common European data spaces needs to be mature. And this is when we, as a project leaders or as a project contributors, we can contribute, we can help on that. My role in this short introduction is just to present the state of the art in how these marketplaces for data are related or are defined. So you can have in one side the data subscriptors, in the other side you have the data providers or data processors, and then there is central marketplaces that collect all this information and then start to do some sort of selling applications, exchange, trading, etc. And of course, there will be some sort of repositories or data warehouses that all this information reside. But you see, this approach is the marketplace-centric approach. Is it efficient or not? It's not a question at the moment. We're not analyzing it, but this is also one of the approaches that exist. The other approach comes more from an economical perspective. So in here, by saying that the data is the oil of the century 21, so we need to centralize this data as a main exploitable asset, and that's why in this model of data marketplaces is the central part of this model. This is coming more from a very well-known journal, which is the Intereconomics, and as I said before, is economic centric. Still, we have the data providers, data consumers. The data marketplace is on the top, and then we have also the interactions among them to make what we call a consumption or a production of these data sets. And the last but not least is what we have done in collaboration between the projects or in these projects, that we have just the data centric, but we are now using the GDPR, because probably the previous approaches were not according to these regulations or with these recommendations. But in this case, we have now the data model, which is completely compliant. The data-centric approach remains because we still assess that the data is the the central part. And then we have these different players, stakeholders, providers, consumers, processors, providers of the data, service data, and aggregators. You see, this vocabulary is more adequate to current times. And this is basically coming from 2019, so which is basically the most recent version of this model. These three combined are basically the state of the art, the state of play. And with this short introduction, I just wanted to highlight, to awake you to be aware of this model, which is basically the data-centric part. So I get back to Justina, because now we have prepared a small panel that will be the interaction between all these concepts. Justina, it's back to you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much for indeed setting the tone a little bit for our follow-up discussion. So once we see a little bit the state of art, where we stand here in Europe, we can proceed with the next step and discuss a little bit about certain solutions that are there to change the situation and to move further from where we stand today. So I let you, Martin, to get a glass of water, perhaps, and let me start today with Pedro, who is a professor at University Rovira i Virgili in Spain. Pedro, you're also leading Cloud and Distributed Systems Lab, and also you have led a number of EU-funded projects. So we are really happy to have you on board. And I know that today you want to tell us a bit more about Cloud Button project. So if you can just say a few words very briefly to our attendees today, what's the project is about. I know it just finished, so perhaps where you stand today, a few months after you have concluded it.
Thank you a lot. So, okay, let me share my screen. I imagine that you see now the screen. So you see my screen is correct? Yes. So yes, about Cloud Button is a
yes, it's perfect.
Cloud Button is serverless data analytic platform. It's a 3-year project that is finishing in June this year. The main goal is to democratize big data by simplifying the programming model thanks to serverless technologies. Serverless technologies will really help us simplify how you run and provision things in the cloud. And we are demonstrating that with genomics, metabolomics, and geospatial data, these 3 fields with big volumes. And Cloud Button, it's inspired by this phrase, like, why there is no Cloud Button? And he said, why can I pass a button and have my code running in the cloud without much effort? And this idea of simplification, the button in the cloud is our idea. And because it's brief, I want to go directly to our outcomes. And Lithops is an open source toolkit that you can find in GitHub. It's not a research prototype. So this is a mature project that it's in production, created by IBM, URB, and other partners. It's really in production. It's multi-cloud, so we avoid vendor locking. You can deploy applications in any of these cloud providers and on-premise with other Kubernetes technologies. It abstracts the layer of storage and compute, and it really enables you to run a Jupyter notebook and scale it massively with big data. So this is running in EMBL in production. IBM is running in its cloud with finance clients. It is used in the UK in different genomic groups, and it is used in 2 startups that we are creating in the group. So as I said, it's really the simplicity of write once, run anywhere, and simplification. I want to launch this. Simplifications in code and no provisioning at all. You pay as you go, only for you need, and with Lithops providing hiding the complexity in the different cloud providers. And that's my overall idea. And if you want to take out, look at Lithops in the cloud. So I want to finish here and continue with the others.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Pedro. So just a small remark for those watching us. So we will go a little bit through all the 3 projects that we are talking about today, and then we will keep on with the questions. So you can, if you have any questions already to our presenters, you can write down them in the chat. I'm following the chat, so I will definitely see those. And we are now discussing this wider approach, of course. And we will get to the technical details as Martin presented in the agenda a little bit later. So just to remind to those watching us. And then Andreas, perhaps we can go on with you. So you are a senior advisor in Governance One, and I know you work for a number of companies, so you are really into research and innovation. And you are one of the partners in Trust project. So tell us a little bit more what your project is doing and perhaps to whom this project is dedicated to, who can use the results of the project.
Yes, thank you for your introduction. Thank you for the two colleagues before. While you were speaking, Martin, I was switching off a couple of my slides because it would be doubled. Just for introduction, the Horizon 2020 project is about to establish a trusted, secure data sharing space, as other projects in the Union as well. And I'm just focusing first on this. We have, of course, found also that the service providers, data providers, and so on, all these roles in a different way. On the right side, you see the end user. What we identified, which is a new and, for our understanding, a crucial role, is the data broker or data entrepreneur, because the technical infrastructure, what is between databases or data seeker, data provider, is very often not a technical problem, but it's more a business model problem. I will come back to that a bit later. I have just some introductory slides. So what are we doing? We are focusing with our platform. We are establishing a platform. It's based on two existing approaches, one from Austria, Data Market Austria was from 2016 to 18. And the IDSA is also one of our consortia partners. They're bringing in their approach and their technique of data market connections. What are we targeting? We are targeting sovereignty, federation, interoperability. That means on the one side, we are trying to establish a platform for data exchange, but also a data market where you can trade data. This is a very tricky part. And the third is that we are intending to be an ecosystem, and means a federator of existing data platforms and data markets. Also, like I3, trying to think about interoperability, about the possibilities to bring together existing data sources, find them. So in this functional part, we're focusing on a very decent, sophisticated recommender system, so that the person who is searching amongst different data platforms can get help by our recommender system, which is done by an Austrian research company. So what we see, data sharing is one of the core points, of course. What is the problems? We have lots of interoperability, hardware and software problems. If you think of not only data sharing, but data spaces, then we have a fragmentation, and again, the problem of interoperability, as you have maybe heard from the Gaia-X approach. This approach is targeting the data spaces itself. And at the moment, they are targeting industry data spaces like mobility, health, and so on. So that is a very good and important step to do. So data sharing, we did since the beginning of internet with different protocols, but data sharing on platforms is a comparatively new thing. Data spaces is something which is to come. Really, data marketplaces, that is the point, is that data, as Martin mentioned before, have a value itself. So a really data-driven approach, data as a product to sell, to trade, that is yet to come. At the moment, we made a research of our existing European data markets, and not many of them are running without subsidies. That means not many of them, maybe none of them, is running fully professional as a data market. And this is one of the points which is not easy to understand and to overcome, because we have a very big hand and egg problem, because we need to have a certain number of users, and then we can have a certain number of marketplaces. Without users, marketplaces are difficult. If we look on existing data places, there might be a hierarchy between orientation between hierarchy and market. I'm not going deeper into that, but we will share that with you and also with the ownership. And again, what is here, what is at the moment for us interesting is the brokerage services. Because I think between product, trade, and service, these three are cornerstones of it, to establish an ecosystem, the function of a broker, of a data broker, of a data entrepreneur is important to establish small markets, markets within the markets. So that means within mobility data space, what Gaia X would call it a use case, but I would call it a business case, a self-sustaining data exchange platform, which has on the one side a value creation model, on the other side a profit model, and has a business logic in the background. And what we see from our work with overviewing existing data markets or data exchange places, and also our own work with SMEs, is that a use case need to have a kind of business sustainability. What is the interest of a small and medium enterprise to share data? What is it in for him or her? What could be the profits out of sharing data? Since Martin said it's gold, data is the new gold, but what we see in practice is that the extraction of the gold out of the sand is not so easy. And right at the moment, there are not many solid and sustainable business models. So what we see, we need, from our perspective, establishing the technology, interoperability. We have central nodes, we can access and connect other databases, other data markets. We have also multi-party computing approaches in our pilots, in use cases, and so on and so on. But to get these things flying, it's important to focus on a business-oriented, sustainable business model. I think that is, in short, our learning. How could our solution power the digital transformation of euros? The functional use of it is to create exchange of data itself, to create another possibility to exchange data. Second one is to connect existing data markets and existing into a bigger federation of data markets. And of course, if a company would like to trade her own data on our platform, we are a technical infrastructure where you can easily connect to. We were asked in the preparation of the call, what are the biggest problem? The biggest problem is the hen and egg. The total number of data seekers and providers is yet too low. That means it's a big market hall and very little number of customers in this shopping mall. That has
Andreas, I'm sorry to jump in.
Yes.
Perhaps we can discuss this in more details with all of our presenters, because I see that you are trying to cover everything, but I think it would be interesting if we could talk a little bit about all these points in between. So perhaps you can just conclude the presentation and we get back to this, because I think what you're raising here is very, very interesting, and I would like Pedro and Martin to also react a little bit on that,
okay,
on these points that you're raising. Good?
Yes. Okay, I will come back because we have the next hour time to discuss that.
Exactly, and I think it's very interesting, and also the fact that you put it into bullets in the slides, I think it's a very good start of a discussion. So Martin, I will just get the floor to you to tell us a little bit about iFree Market and what's the solution there that iFree Market puts on the table, and then we will get back to discuss the points already raised by Andreas, if that's okay.
Sure, I can do that, definitely. All right, so this is not the slide, it's just complex. Okay, so iFree Market is one of these ICT training call that was looking at providing tools and elements to support the development of the SME ecosystem, industry ecosystems, and then make these aspects interoperable, right? So you can see here, there are 4 main areas where iFree Market look at: industrial data, big data, interoperability, that was mentioned by Andreas, which actually set on the tone very good. We focus on security, privacy, and trust, because this is the element that probably has been failed over the attempts. And we want to, because we want to be a blueprint project or a reference implementation project, we release in open source. So basically what we are doing is providing this elements and nodes to be together. So we call it intelligent because we have application services that use the data towards AI applications. Interoperable because we have enabled data models. Integrative because it can be different elements put into different platforms or in different systems. And deployable because we are making it via open source accessible. So let me just go into one quick reflection here. So data spaces has a very broad definition, right? You can call it database, and then the volume of databases can be called data space at some point. Data warehouses, which is common term in industry. So when you have all these different models and different data sets, information. Data lakes, when you have different technologies accessing different type of data as well. And data hubs, when you have all this collection of data from multiple sources. So all of them are valid state-of-the-art, state-of-play applications. What we are building in IT market is precisely to enable that these ecosystems or these systems can, towards a marketplace, be operative. Now, obviously, you can see or you can think, is this going to be only a marketplace, a single marketplace, as the Commission is proposing? It's not. We're not talking about the single digital marketplace as a single marketplaces. We still believe that there will be multiple marketplaces, and this is our job in IT market: make them interoperable, make them able to exchange data, metadata, or as simple as just offerings in our terms, to be able to exchange this information in principle, to enable what we call in IT market data as a service. So this is the main, let's say, proposition in our aspect. So we are not coming from scratch. So we have this specification from the IDSA. So in this data sharing infrastructure, what we are building is especially the enabling this data, right? So our proposition is we will have a backplane data model, so that enables this interoperability. We have this backplane implementation, and obviously we enable via APIs. Today, every developer, every company just talks about APIs. So why not to go with the current trends? There are many other ways, of course, but this is the current trends and the current markets demand. So we are satisfying one of the demand sides. And then we have also our pilots to demonstrate that our backplane with our data model is operative and functional. At the end, we have some front ends, which we call marketplaces in proper terms. We also have a data space to be diverse. And we also have these demonstrators or these domain-specific applications. We call it marketplace services. So all in all, comes together to define requirements and satisfy this model from Intereconomics that I presented before, I explained it before as a generic, but now we are addressing each of them from a perspective of stack. So we have the revenue model, we have a pricing model, we have proposed the architecture, we have a transformation, we integrate this one into different market accessibility for marketplaces, and then we have this market position for the value proposition that they might have. So you can think in single marketplaces, looking at specific data sets that they might not have in their ecosystem, but with IT market, they can get connected and access to do them. And most important, to buy them, right? Because at the end, we're talking about this economy aspect of the data. And of course, we have these characteristics in terms of transactions, data-centric, data suppliers, neutrals. All these are definitions that are still valid in the economical aspect of the data. And then we are precisely with these attributes mapping the functionalities with the demands. So all these type of data transformation with raw data, normalization, aggregation are common terms in the demand side, in the marketplaces. But when we go into these marketplaces and the technology side, it's impossible to translate this one. With smart contracts, we are doing that. So this is the type of approaches that we have. With the offerings, we are addressing this packaging and these free models and progressive models, because all these smart contracts together with the data model are going to be able to produce what we call this digital service. At the end, the smart contracts are digital service. And then we also have considered these different revenue models, because obviously this is not going to be for free. Obviously, we are subsidized by or supported by the Commission to develop these technologies, but we also need to think in what will be the next. And for that one, we are studying this free premium flat rate fees, listening fees, fees for service, fees for storage, and all these revenue models are already as part of our ecosystem. You see, IT market is building a blueprint for all the elements that can play together. It's not a perfect ecosystem. It's open source. It's open to improve, but at least we have the seeds to enable this growth in terms of data economy, right? And now I will stop here because this is just the integration of this concept that I just mentioned, but I will come back later when we discuss together. This is just the flavor of what we are integrating. So you have data spaces, we have marketplaces, and via these interfaces, APIs, we are building the green part of this diagram, which is the backplane. And the backplane is not other than these interfaces that behind has some components, software running 24/7 with some privacy and security concerns addressed, and also with this data sharing and data storage. So I will stop here for what corresponds to IT market, but I will get back in some other technical aspects later. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. So perhaps before we talk further and deeper about the European idea, I would like to ask all three of you if you could, just for those watching us, put the right emphasis. So if I'm a data SME, I'm a company, what changes for me today using your solution compared to what I had yesterday? Just in one sentence, so that we have the same phases from your presentations. Martin, we can start with you. Having i3 Market, me as a company, what will change in my life?
Yes, basically we'll change the perception of difficulty, because in all these ecosystems there is a concept of it's too difficult. Adopting a new data model is going to change my infrastructure, my ecosystem. The answer with IT Market, or at least with this approach, is we facilitate to you the adoption of a new data model without changing your previous infrastructure. Because what we are doing is just layering, putting a new layer, which is basically a semantic layer, to facilitate that you can go into other marketplaces. So we are expanding as well the opportunities for exploitation of your assets, data assets, into other marketplaces.
Andreas, from your side.
From my side, we bring the algorithms to the data. That means that data which is confidential is not shared with other parties, but the insights. So that means we have a multi-party computing approach in our pilot. That means a company does not need to give away her data to have insights into that. And of course, it's easy to use. We have a standardized connection model based on the IDS connectors. So also making it easy for companies to jump into sharing world.
And Pedro, your highlight here?
Thanks. Yeah, well, my highlight is if you are a data SME and you want to move to the cloud, it's complex, can be expensive, and you need to hire experts, probably cloud or backend engineers. With our solution, you don't need that. You need a front-end engineer knowing Python, using a notebook, and we solve your resource provisioning to optimize the use of the cloud. So mainly is enable you to move to the cloud much easier, because the cloud can be complex and expensive. That's the message.
Perfect. And then if we move further on from a company level to a bit bigger picture that both Andreas, you and Martin have already touched upon. So if you could get back to the points, Andreas, maybe you can start and set a little bit the tone, and I will ask Pedro and Martin to comment a little bit how you see it from your perspective. So what are these European-wide challenges, and how do your solutions help not for a single company, but wider for Europe itself to move ahead with digital transformation, and what are the challenges that you are resolving here?
As I mentioned before, the biggest problem is the hen and egg problem. That means the total number of users are using these sharing economies. With the different projects, Horizon projects, also GaiaX, I think this will be increased, so the total number will rise up. Then we have widely set a data illiteracy. I would call it data illiteracy. That means there's a low data sharing competence of companies. And that means it needs to have educative programs, or so to say, to reduce the level for the companies to jump in, as Pedro said, and also Martin. It should be as low barriers as possible. And I think we also need to have a regulatory framework. At the moment, we have big legal problems with securing data. because there is no possibility to own data, I mean, as a property, because it has not a body in most of the European legislations. And it would be interesting if we find a solution for European jurisdiction to have data as a property, which could increase the level of protection of data and data sharing.
That's a very interesting point, Pedro. Martin, do you agree with this? Do you face difficulties regarding the legislation as well, or perhaps not at all, and you see other challenges? I don't know, whichever of you would like to start.
Sure, I can go, Justina. Definitely there is a barrier in here in terms of regulations, right? So many large companies are confronting that they are not competitive enough to changes or to adapt to these regulations. As simple as GDPR, for example, right? If you want to sell data assets, you will need to be compliant with this GDPR. Indigenous companies, SMEs, might not be having the same issues in terms of adaptation, technology speaking, but also they're under the same regulation. So the difference is that maybe in a company, they have more bureaucratic processes because it's a large company, while in SME, you have 1 or 2 people dedicated to that. And they're more agile or more efficient, you can call it like that. So this ties 2 elements between technology and how the technology address the regulation, and in the other side, how the regulation stop or promote the use of the technology. And in terms of IT market, we also have one activity, one full component that is precisely to define the legal framework. And this tied with the smart contract and with a blockchain. So you see, you start to understand. So we have privacy concerns via GDPR implemented in a blockchain for consent management, but also we have these regulatory frameworks considering what regulations are as important, and then they will reflect it in the smart contract. So these 3 elements are key for the progress and for the facility of these solutions. And I think we are doing not reinventing the wheels here, because we are just using the technology that exists. But what we are doing innovation is providing this one as a reference implementation. Then now new developers, new companies will see this implementation from the essence, and they will understand, instead of just trying to use a product that they might not drive them to a good end. But in here, they will see how to do it from the beginning. So that's I say this is the main contribution in this discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have data ownership questions and compliance with existing legislations. Pedro, from your side?
Well, I would diverge a little regarding legislation, and as a challenge for me, clearly, is to focus on vertical domains. I mean, I think one big mistake, I coordinated now 3 projects in a row and before others, it's we try to create universal solutions that work for everybody, and we have very different use cases in different domains. This is a mistake. I mean, because every vertical domain will have different challenges. Like in data spaces, you have different data types, different data management protocols, different data legislation and policies. So you really have to provide solutions to a vertical domain. For example, we are focusing now on omics, metabolomics, and genomics. So we built a data space with EMBL that is Metaspace, built on top of our technologies, but it's focused on metabolomics. And then they have their legal issues, they have their community, but you really have to work hand by hand and collaborate multidisciplinary with these people to give them a solution for the vertical domain that they are using. And I would think that for the other cases, it's not the same legal framework in one type of sensitive data or data types that it's in the other, even in between metabolomics and genomics and others. So for me, the challenge is really not aiming for silver bullets, but really providing like vertical solutions for specific domains that work within this community, and the community accepts it because you work with the leaders of that community, and then you create startups that are accepted by that community and that know the legislation in that community. So that I would say that is my experience here.
And I think given that European Commission is also concentrating now on data spaces in different industrial sectors, I believe this is anyway in a way an approach that Europe is moving on so far. So I'm wondering, Martin, Andreas, do you agree with this approach? Do you think this is a right thing to go more through the verticals, and your solutions are rather horizontal? So how does this play into the big picture?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justina. I would like to underline one aspect. I like the approach from Pedro, definitely, because verticals has their own needs. Regulatory aspects or regulatory frameworks are European law, basically, or European recommendations. And then how we interpret and how we adapt these ones into different verticals is what Pedro referred. I support him in 100%. Now, what we have to also consider is that if we introduce the term ecosystems, right? As any vertical that Pedro mentioned is an ecosystem. So every ecosystem has to also interact with other ecosystems. It's impossible to believe that ports, for example, are separated from smart cities. So at the end, they have a connection, which is the people moving from the ship when they arrive, or the goods when they arrive into the port, and how this is distributed in the city, creating traffic, and all this, if we transform them into the data models, so the data at the end will be the same, right? Because the same volume of people will be the same people that are going to the city, or even more. And if we talk about goods and assets, so it will be the same point. Now, when we talk about how to support this mobility or this interaction between ecosystems, is when we have these horizontal approaches, because we really need tools. And I also agree with Pedro and with Andreas. We don't need to have a universal approach. It's impossible to believe that we will have one for all, one size that fits all. And here we need to have tools that are adaptive, tools that work in maybe different ecosystems, and most important, enable the technologies and these tools that are easy to take from one point and integrate it in the other point. And this is when we come with open source. Open source is not this anymore perception of free and not any more opportunities for monetizing. It's the opposite. By having open source, you have more easy ways to adapt the technology to your own ecosystem and satisfy these local needs or vertical needs, but at the same time monetize the economy. Yeah. So I think that this is the puntualization that I want to mention, because we are not creating, I don't think Andreas, Pedro, myself, I creating the unique approach. So we are especially contributing to these tools that can be used in different ecosystems.
Thank you. Many aspects I could just agree with. The horizontal, the vertical aspect is also important for the legal aspect, because when the use case of Pedro dealing with data which is covered by GDPR, of course, this need to have a different approach to work with. When we work with industrial data, GDPR is not so much applicable. All other law measures are also not applicable that much. So we have a different approach in the verticals. But what I want to point out is what is innovation itself. Innovation is when knowledge comes to the edge of the already known and gets something new. That means also always on the edge of existing knowledge, there is new knowledge and innovation. And if we are only focusing, and I fully support the bottom-up aspect in the verticals, coming from use cases, thinking of what is the vertical, what is the industry, but to come to really innovations, we need to come again out of silos. That means the automotive guys need to get innovation or data from other spaces. And therefore, one of our approaches is on the top level, from top down, it should be connected, harmonized with standardized connectors. So maybe the EDC connector or the IDS connector or other approaches from which is discussed in Gaia X. So on the top level, we should have a kind of common language or understanding so that we can plug in our verticals into that meta ecosystem. Because then what is also in your platform and in ours is this recommender or search possibility to search in other domains. I think this is a very important topic, but the actual work, the business work is in a vertical topic oriented surrounding. So it's important that to bring together our three opinions, we have a bottom up and a top down approach from both sides. It's important to have this. The standardization, which is IDSA stands for on the one side as a framework and interoperability, and from the practical side for the companies, it should be as practical as possible. I'm involved in 2 touristic use cases. They're so operational, so practical, but they're running also economically. It's interesting for the touristic destinations to run this because they have really an advantage out of that project. So operational, small scale in vertical, but the overall connection should be top down with standards.
Very good.
That's very interesting. And sure.
Yeah, thank you. Because this is very interesting because at the end, we are talking about ecosystems. We are talking about this top-bottom approach and bottom-top. And this should be a gluey point, yes, because all this is like a matrix. So we should be able to tie all these knots. And here I have maybe a discussion point for us. So the federation of all this, right, or the orchestration in technology terms. So we will know that these ecosystems will coexist because it's industry. So at the end, industry will drive the innovation, as Andreas mentioned. But we also know that all these research initiatives and all these projects are going to have a good end, maybe not in 3 years, but maybe in 5 years, depends on the solutions. But we are talking about this federation, right? So because now is the new trend on talking about this connecting. The concept in a high level is federation. The technology, the concept at the technology level is orchestration. And in a very low level is precisely this interoperability. And by having these notions today, even our new projects or these projects that are now finalizing should have a continuity, right? And this federation and orchestration will be probably a way out of this. I don't know what Pedro and Andreas think on this, but it's something that I haven't seen before, even at the research level. So who can federate, who can orchestrate? And I think the initiatives should be resonate in the commission to input, to motivate and support these connections, because yes, it's true, we have now solutions for ports, for automotive, for manufacturing, for smart cities, but now how we can glue them together? Who's going to orchestrate that? Who's going to make them interoperable? Who's going to make them federated? It's just a point for discussion, right?
My opinion, well, Andrea probably wants, no, Justina, can I talk or you want to say something? I can go. So no, my point on that is probably I am insisting in the same topic, but federations are fine and orchestration, and I think it's the next thing that we should plan inside each vertical domain. So now, for example, I know in our case, we have Metaspace is cloud-centric, and now because now they have leaders, and now they are spreading to create a federation because the people that were interested in them now want to run it on premise and federate with them. So I see federation in the same domain, super interesting. So it should be like next steps in promoting. So we want European leaders in each vertical domain or data space, like tourism, like industry, like omics, like whatever vertical domain. And to create these leaders, you also need to federate the pharma labs, the hospitals, the doctors, the industry, the clients in each domain. I mean, when we talk about federating heterogeneous domain, I see more like a second phase. I mean, if we don't have the first phase, that it's federations in the same domain, talking about interacting with others, it cannot become a standard. I mean, it's very difficult that this is accepted by the industry because there is no standard even in their own domain. So creating glues or federations, try to create them first in a single domain with all the complexity that you have. And then these top-bottom approaches should happen when you already have some well-established frameworks or federations for a single domain. If not, you have difficulties to doing that. And that's only my opinion, my humble opinion, of course. I can be wrong.
I think that some parts of the infrastructure for data market or data exchange should be a public duty. If you think of normal food or vegetable markets in the 19th century, what did the municipalities start? They found out in this time that bacteria and viruses are dangerous for the inhabitants of the cities. So they started to make in Paris, Les Halles, or in Covent Garden or other places, they started to make a house out around the marketplaces to keep the rats out. Yeah, and that means it was an investment by the public sector to secure public health. And in these market halls, you have sections for fish, the verticals, you have sections for vegetables and so on. So you have verticals in there, and each small shop is then organized itself. So that would be the bottom-up approach, and the top-down approach would be we need to have a kind of public standards or public market hall, and some infrastructure cost should be covered by that. That means the roof, the heating, and so on, and should be covered by the shop owners, but the shops should be decentralized. I think that this idea of a market hall, and also if you look in our societies, how these market halls developed in the last 200 years, I think this maybe could be an inspiration for the European Commission to say, we have some basics, some infrastructure basics, some standards, some legal securities. Maybe we have also a kind of security house, a certificate, security European framework, which is protected very well, and so on. So because one of the things is how to protect yourself from state hackers from other countries, which would be happy to have access to 50% of all companies' data in Europe. I think this is the perfect target for state hackers from other countries to have access to this. So I think parts of our discussion should be forwarded to the Commission to establish a kind of European data house. And in that, the bottom-up approach, vertical, I'm absolutely supporting.
Yeah, let me disagree on that, because, I mean, having a panel and everybody agrees and support things is maybe not funny, but I'm coming from the perspective of industrial innovation, right? Because Andreas, you touched that already. So I have been exposed in many business opportunities in the ecosystem in the Silicon Valley, and also in the East Coast in the MIT. For some years, I have been lecturing and teaching over there students, and they have a different background, different perspective. But let me bring back this one to Europe, right? So I disagree that European Commission or the Research Council, Innovation Council should take over on this data house. I like the concept, which basically is aligned with this federation, but why not the industry? I mean, because at the end, the industry is the one that will benefit from this. I think that there is a connection. That's true. The European Commission should enable the channels to elaborate the requirements of the industry, and then we will grow as a European ecosystem. Because otherwise, if we rely in the Commission to also create the house and enable the projects, the innovation, the research, then the industry will move towards this ecosystem. But it should be the opposite. The industry should have their own business cases, their own business opportunities, and then this house should be created by them, should be driven by them. And then the Commission will just need to hear and talk with them in a regular basis. Okay, what are your needs? What are your demand side? And then I can see how I can enable the supply side by research, by innovation actions, by interrecs, by live project, whatever is the format. It doesn't matter, because at the end it's a demand side satisfaction. But you see, I'm not totally convinced, Andreas, that this model might work in Horizons Europe. But what I am convinced is that as a research community, we will be able to satisfy demands as far as they are clear from the industry. Because otherwise we are replicating the example of the chicken and egg, or the seed and the tree, right? Because what is going to first do? Someone has to create it. And here it's like an economical exercise. So at the end, it's an economical exercise. That's why fintechs, financial technologies today are high. And that's why I will say that the main support should be towards this ecosystem in potential, because not even the US, not even the Asia is getting in these financial technologies as a leaders. So it's very indigenous, it's very new. So if we, as a research community, as a European Commission, as a society, we learn and we apply these learnings in industry, so in economy, so we can really be leaders in financial technology. So that's why federation and this data house and this fintechs could be one potential area for us. I mean,
I'm on the same side with you with what is innovation, and it should be driven by businesses, absolutely. The problem may be that only platforms will come out. So only the big players who have enough money and time to create a platform and then try to centralize. If you look on what Microsoft did with the Azure marketplace, They tried to sell data on Azure, and they stopped selling data over Azure because it was not lucrative. It was not a market. It was just a supermarket. If I go to a supermarket, I know that I need milk and butter. I go to the shelf and take it out, and then I go. With data, if I'm in a specific field like Pedro, I have an idea what I need, and I can approach directly the people. I don't need the supermarket shelf. So the idea of having a supermarket with all data, so to say one platform, what Microsoft approach was, this will not work. We tried to do this in Data Market Austria 2017 and 18. It was not the business concept to have a supermarket. So we came to the idea of a market hall, yeah. So with different small shops, vertical shops, and at the moment, and that would be my question: how is your project, the future of your project when it ends? Is it already that you have an operating company which is taking over your open source software, who is funding it, who has the governance, the rights, the laws, and so on? What is the future of your project? I think all research projects have this problem. At the end, someone is switching off the server, and all our good concepts are on some storages. So what is the future of your project? Did you have already established an operating company? Because that is what I'm working on at the moment. How can we work on an operating company, which might be a profit company, which might be an union? Yeah, we are thinking about data union amongst different partners, or a charity organization, or kind of whatever. Who's operating our service, which we created over this 2.5 years? And this is a big problem for the sustainability of our work. And if Microsoft would come and say, okay, here is 1 million, just go for it, then we have again this problem that it's one platform. That is the approach from IDSA to work a bit against this platform platform ideas of the big players, because they have money and can centralize things. So the approach of Europe is, even if it's more difficult, to have different opinions in one big group, in a council, but how to create a council out of small islands of interesting and successful projects. I think that is structurally a not easy approach. So on the business side, I'm fully with you. Yeah, I'm coming from business. Therefore, I say that the use cases need to be a business case. Yeah, but on the platform side, I'm more public oriented. I think that otherwise the big players will come and just pay, but we can see even with Microsoft not successful. Correct. In the past.
Actually, yeah, no, that's a valid point. I have my own opinion on Microsoft case, because I was following all these data marketplaces. Yeah, DAWX, Azure, Google. So I think there was a series of elements that they came too early. I mean, they came too early before even the GDPR regulation was in there. So that's why, at least in Europe, it was stopped, completely stopped, because they were not allowed to even commercialize data that they own in the perspective of collecting. The second mistake, or the second proposition that they have, is like they have this shop, but it was very communist shop. Yeah, everything was defined by them, and if you don't want to buy, there is no other options. So that's the second mistake I observed. Like when you go to supermarket and you have only one brand of milk, yeah, and you don't have even variations of the milk. You don't have light, you don't have 20% fat free, and you don't have a full fat free. You have only full milk, full fat milk. That was the kind of approach from Microsoft in that time. That was the way they understood the market in that time. Now, today we have understood, and even the society has better understanding on data. We are not prepared as a society to even sell our data sets, but we know it has value. So that's why this regulation helps us. So what I see as a future, as a coming trend, is that these Microsoft shops, or any other kind of a data shop or data market, will start to provide the different jar sizes, you know, the data from medical domain, the data from automotive, but also in different sizes, in different proportions. The data set will be bigger, smaller. Data will be also quality data, and some of them will be just sample data. And all these variations will satisfy different market needs. If I am a laboratory, if I am a test bed, I'm a pharmaceutical, I would like to have access to data sets to test my trials. And when it becomes to be more relevant, then I can buy all the type of data, more expensive data, because I want to go to the next step. But I don't want to pay the high fees that Microsoft was offering for these data sets, because I don't even know if this data will be useful for me. You see, by having all this diversity in the shop, let's call it data marketplace, will open a new opportunities. And tied in the answer to your question of how we are preparing in our projects, and probably also Pedro can comment on this because I don't want to take all this floor. But what we are doing is precisely these revenue models, because at the end, the revenue model will see what the demand side is looking for. If the demand side is looking for sample data for automotive, that is coming from all these electric cars, for energy, or for energy harvestation, or for weather conditions to minimize the pollution, we need to offer that. And because the automotive sector is very healthy-wise economically, maybe the price will be based on demand, yeah? But we cannot go in the same way in smart cities. I mean, in smart cities, we all know that all this traffic analysis data, mobility, tourism, Wi-Fi, all this data is there. And we even have open data sets. And these SMEs can go and take these open data sets. But they didn't take off enough because they didn't have a central point. So there should be a marketplace that collects all this data and offer it as a market for interaction. So see, this I'm just thinking loud, but this is the next way. Yeah, this is the next step. And in IT market, we're just providing these revenue models, price models that precisely satisfy these multiple satisfaction. But Andreas, don't get me wrong. I like the idea of these multi-shops. It's like having Spars and Oxos, and having also the shop around the corner from the local owner. And then we will have different products, because instead of having Microsoft selling to everyone, like Amazon selling to everyone, we will have small distributors, and it will be an ecosystem. And here's when Europe can lead this opportunity. But I'm just thinking loud in terms of what are the next steps. But we are preparing that one. So at least for IT market, maybe Pedro, you can say how you are preparing the next wave.
Yeah. No, I mean, Andreas raised a super important, a super important question, that is the survival of EU projects. And of course, software lives very soon. And you can see very easily in GitHub if it's 3 months without commits, or if it's 1 year without commits, and many projects end funding and die completely. And this is really the risk of these European projects. And of course, what are we trying to do? And we always try is, first, some companies should continue investing on that. So they should be offering it to their clients. 2, startups could arise from key groups. So on the one hand, in our project, for example, IBM Red Hat is using it, and it's sustaining and maintaining the tool. But also, because it's open source, it's Apache 2, 2 companies are emerging from here. One from EMBL, that is a SpaceM, that is in incubation, and one from our university. And we already have the business plan, we already have clients, technology transfer with people. And if the research group is strong and you have funding, you can continue building on that to continue on the creation of that. If not, it's very difficult. I have to recognize some of my past projects, funding stops, and you cannot continue if you don't have like a super adopted platform or interested clients and things like that. And here, what it would be nice, because Americans have much more money than us. The problem with Europe is that you have three-year projects, that sometimes you create something that then you need a little bit more path. So we, of course, continue applying for projects where we want to continue doing more things and leading that. But sometimes, I mean, we all know the competition in the EU calls. Sometimes you don't achieve the money to continue that. And it would be super interesting that the Commission selects like projects. It's very easy to see it with the outcomes, like companies, open source projects that are live, communities, and then really continue investing on that. And sometimes the SME instruments and AIC are very early for 3 years. So you need like 1 or more 2 years of stabilization. So I think that the EU still lacks some tools to stabilize some of the results of the project. But I mean, all of us know the difficulties of software and maintaining open source software and having the community, this is very easy to see what is going to happen in a few months if you see the commits of each project. Yes, we are all fighting in this war. Yes, I agree.
There would be one suggestion to the Commission if she would listen to me. If you have projects where you have business parts, like you talked about, and I and you, Martin, and you have development, the development should have a maximum length of developing, because this is the third project in this data surrounding, where the programmers, the developers develop until the last day of the project. And that means for the community building and for the testing in the market, there is hardly any possibility, because just until the end of the project, they're developing and of course increasing the quality and so on. But this is one of the project problems I faced a couple of times in a couple of projects, that for trying to establish this data entrepreneur ecosystem, to find maybe 20 data entrepreneur who would like to start a business case. We have interesting business case. I was involved in the last half year in maybe 6, 7 very interesting small business cases for data circles or use cases. Out of each of them, you could make a small startup. But what I see is that the maturity of technology is not yet so high, so we could really give the startup to fly. It's not able to fly yet. It's missing some steps in between.
I think we are running out of time, but it's indeed very interesting, and we will actually have a similar session and discussion in IoT Week very soon. It's coming in 2-3 weeks from now, so I think we can continue with similar conversations out there. But it was very interesting, and thank you all. I'm happy I was not needed in the second part of this discussion. And I noted down a lot of very interesting points for which I think for our work and future discussions with the European Commission, definitely many of these points will be raised, because it was very insightful. So perhaps just to conclude, 1 minute to each of you. So we might disagree, on how we will get there, or what are the best ways to get to the future ecosystem of data in Europe. But perhaps if we could conclude, each of you, so how do you see this future and where your project stands in that future? Just, I know it's very hard to do it in a brief 2 sentences, but if each of you could just try to give this futuristic picture to us. Pedro, you're laughing. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if I like science fiction, and I like the future and the speculation. So no, what I really think that we must aim for the next year is European leadership in specific domains where we have the research talent, the industrial ecosystem, the users. I mean, we really have to push in the differentiating vertical domains where Europe can stand, and we can create this Brussels effect that then it's adopted everywhere. So really, I really think that we will achieve that in the next 3 to 6 years. We will have champions in some vertical domains in Europe.
Thank you, Martin.
Yes, sure. I was waiting for Andreas. I can go first. Okay, no problem. Yeah, so my message or my conclusive message is we should continue supporting open source, whatever is the pros and cons. I can tell you by experience that after 3 or 4 years, even if you don't see commitments, industries are looking at these projects, and they are not really committing, maybe not contributing, because they have their own agendas and their own ways of marketing and so on. But they take these projects and they exploit it. And at least I have 2 good examples that European companies, large companies, has adopted open source solutions from our project. I'm talking about OpenIoT, I'm talking about Vitalos, and all these technologies are in markets and solutions now. How we can maintain those ecosystems, there are different ways. So there are different opportunities as well. So either we as pioneers and promoters of open source, we take the responsibility and then we engage with other projects, or we look for these big companies like Red Hat to maybe adopt and adapt this one, or even Eclipse. I mean, Eclipse is an American company, but they also have a European branch in here. So I remember talking with the Eclipse Foundation in Europe. So they were willing to adopt the open IoT model, but the European side was faster, and then we released it faster in our side. So I say for the future, open source should be there. So that's the best way to at the moment exploitable assets for Europe.
Again, I'm fully agreeing with the colleagues. My vision for the European future is that we have vertical, I'm referring to Pedro, vertical centers of excellence where the people really come together and work on topic domain specific innovations. On the other side, I'm looking forward to the European data market hall, where we have all these verticals connected maybe to find data from other domains. I think these two aspects would be good. And to distinguish, of course, between open data or open standards data and data to pay, data to use for research and other purposes. I think also in this open source discussion, open source doesn't mean that it's for free. It's just that you have access to the source. And especially in industrial data, of course, for commercialization, we are talking about prices at the end. But I think that could be a vision. Houses of excellence in domains and European data market hall, where everyone can rent in and have a small shop for its data.
Perfect. Thank you very much for all this interactive discussion. It was definitely very, very, very interesting. And then, Martin, I give it back to you to bring this down to a bit more of technical talk and see how we can do all of this in practice.
Thank you, Justina, and very, very fruitful panel and discussions. I think we cover all the aspects that we were planning. So now the technical assets and building blocks. So for this, we will have only 5 minutes on each of these projects to not explain, because it's impossible that in 5 minutes we explain what you can do with technical assets. So there will be other workshops, there will be other opportunities. Just follow up on this data week or IoT week, because even we have sessions everywhere to present our results. But what I will suggest is you just focus on listing a short list of what are our assets and the building blocks. I will start just for simplicity, because the slides are already there, and maybe also can be a good example of just summarizing things. So I mentioned about this diagram before, that was my end slide. If we focus on the green part, which is the backplane, right, and we transform this into a three-dimensional backplane, you can see that we have 5 columns in here in IoT market. We address security from the perspective of individuals accessing data, but also buying data. We have the identity management, because we need to be compliant with regulations, and every identity should also be protected. So that's why we implemented with blockchain for distributed ledger, and it's an open source, VESU, Hyperledger VESU. Then we have also the storage in terms of where the metadata, where all these models of data offering and subscription and the legal frameworks are described. And also we have these contracts for smart contracts generation from data that exists, from offerings that are considered. And then we also have to the legal framework, as I mentioned before. So we have the full pipelines for the full connections all across. And then the payments, because at the end, commercialization of the data is the last end. And we are very, very disruptive and very innovative in here. So we have cloud wallet, hardware wallet to be in the front end of this fintech technologies, right? So we have take this challenge, and we have already released that. So the second diagram is just mapping these 5 columns with our components, because this is technical session. So we have these 5 components, level 1, which basically connect with the gateway and the SDK. The way to implement and to deploy it was an SDK to facilitate people to connect. And then we have our WebRI, which is a kind of a reference marketplace. It's not a marketplace in itself, but we implemented to show how a marketplace will behave and how these marketplaces can connect via the gateway and use the APIs from each of these level 1 systems. Now we have subsystems that basically are those Dockers running in Kubernetes platform that you can deploy and take it out of our ecosystem, our level 2, and then maybe integrate it in your own implementations and solutions. So that's the kind of the magic of this project that we are proposing. So you can take parts of these subsystems, or you can take the full system and then integrate it into your own ecosystem, because at the end it's based on APIs with the standards that we are following and presenting with the open API standard, and also with the data model, which is already public and is publicly available, and everything should be possible to map. In an analogy, you will have different marketplaces talking their own, let's say, data model, but then they will be enabled to via this gateway interact with the other marketplaces, because that will be the translator in between. Now we have also this data model, as I mentioned. This is the main. We formalize it because we wanted to go to the next level. Even we are not going to exploit in this full capacity, but we want to build the formalization on this language, and we are also using DCAT. You know, the DCAT is the standard for W3C, and the European Commission use it even in the ECAS platform. It's everywhere in Europe. So why not support that one? We just extended with the financial part. We extended with the data modeling, with the financial smart contracts, and all these missing parts that are not in the DCAT now is composed, and we call it the Occasus model, right? Because it's collect, access, store, utilize, and sell data. So all this Occasus model is basically the ontology and the formalism that we are bringing to the table, and it's also accessible. It's public. There are already some publications already there, and we are preparing the handbook for all these elements. We have this more, let's say, in deep, aligned with the different work packages and tasks. But as you can see here, we are always talking about these subsystems. So subsystems should be standalone implementation that is able to receive information via APIs, but also provide outputs via this API. And it's not a black box. It's basically the concept of a white box. And when we go into these implementations or use of the data, and we focus on these AI applications, which is the big trend now. So we are talking about this white box is exactly the preamble for explainable AI. So we are really compliant and really addressing this explainable AI by providing this documentation. We also have the onboarding process in preparation. So we will have this onboarding process. And we have enabled for the first time in the open source community, developers portal, which is not just a website. It's basically all the specifications, all the examples, all the code, all the data sets that at some point we will put in there as well. And it's in a very technical way describe it, because it's not selling. We have our own website, our own portal, but this is for developers. And this has been a very successful idea based off COVID. I mean, bad things bring good opportunities, because we enabled to create this idea based on COVID, because we were not able to go to events and open source communities. But then via this open platform, we reach them, and this is the main asset we bring on board. So I think I make it in time. So I now pass the token to Andreas and Pedro in that order, and you can go with your short 5 minutes presentation, technically.
Thank you very much. Impressive. I would be interested to work much more with you with our project. I think hopefully we will be able to do this in the future, because the approaches of A3 and our approach seem to fit very well to each other. So let's see what the future will be.
Andreas, you need to swap your screens because you are sharing the small, just on the top.
Oh.
On the top.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
No, I have a second screen, and presentation started on the second screen.
Yeah.
So that was one of the slides I had before. Out of that, we identified lots of functionalities, and we came from the functional requirements, and we're looking what are the core processes, what are the backbones, what are the data service ecosystem, because that is something which is important. I think these are very similar to the findings you all also had. And this is from the latest minimal viable product, our number 3, how it's structured. So we have a central node. The central node is interacting with the user portal node and the corporate node. And you can see CCAN has a prominent role. We have also in our use cases PSI and other software. So it's mainly focused on open source software as well. So to make it usable after the project. and we're using the data space connector from IDSA, the EDC connector, and so on and so on. So we are really much focusing on the possibilities of open source. And we have, of course, most of the functional requirements are done. Some of them are not yet so far, like identifying life cycle of the hosted data set. That is content data quality topics. That is not that easy, but others are there, others are not. I think that is also normal for projects. Coming back to that, because we are now in the last 6 months of our project, and we are right now working on this business model for the post-project things, because that includes one thing that is what I'm dealing with, is IPR not only of the data which is shared or the rights of the provider and consumers, but especially the rights of the using of the software components, because we have a mixture from all the participating consortia partners. Here you can see some of the functional topics or functional points. We have, of course, used different types of software, and some of them, like this no center recommender engine, this is proprietary software, and most of them is open software. And now we are working on a model of a future licensing model, which enables us to focus on the next steps of the post-project sustainability. And this is not easy for our developers, since the developers normally only think in functions and software tools and so on, and everyone is using this and that and this. And at the end, no one has an overview if the licenses, the relevant software is using, is maybe fitting to each other, Apache 2 license to whatever license, or maybe they're overlapping or even contradictions. Maybe there are license conflicts for future commercial use of the softwares which are developed in our projects. So that is one part what we do now. We try to find out if there are any threats coming from overlapping rights used by various of open source software, and try to find out how to make it commercially usable for the future for any organization, corporation who would like to make it usable in the future. And you can see in this build, in this scheme, that we have lots of different types of software in there. That's from my side. Do you have questions to that?
Very good, thank you. Let's go with Pedro, and then maybe questions in the next. Pedro.
Okay, let me share also. So yes, about the technical results that I would outline here is I would again explain that the major open source project that we have produced is Lithops. Even we have others that I'm not putting here, and you can access in the web page. Lithops, as I said, this is a multi-cloud platform, so you can deploy in IBM Cloud, in Amazon, in Azure, Google Cloud, Alibaba, but also in on-premise clusters. The idea, as I said, is that with very simple Python code, you can process data in parallel. And we are focusing on unstructured data. So we did a big effort on data partitioning and data management of unstructured data formats. Like we focused on data types like LIDAR and Sentinel images in geospatial, IML MSET in metabolomics, and FASTA, FASTQ, and compressed genomics files and MPile labs in genomics. So the idea is that you have in your cloud object storage all this data. Without this, you cannot process it in parallel, and it will take hours. So in our case, things that can take hours, we can execute them in 4 minutes at a cost of $3, because we developed all these partitioners enabling serverless genomics, serverless metabolomics, and serverless geospatial data formats to be processed very easily with a simple map reduce paradigm that transforms data very easily and enables you to execute in different platforms. Here, to give you an example of our technical outcomes, I will put Metaspace. MetaSpace. So it is, as I said, we are focusing the collaboration between us, cloud experts and distributed system experts, and bioinformatics working in omics, like Fyodor Alexandrov in EMBL. He has MetaSpace that comes from another European project, and it's now a leader in metabolomics in the world. This platform is accessible online, and you can, I mean, AstraZeneca and more than 100 partners around the world, in all the world, they are accessing and using the platform, that it's running on top of Lithops. So Lithops is in production in the IBM cloud using this, and even they can execute in other clouds if necessary. So I would say that well, I'm not showing all things, but the technical contributions here is that unstructured data is very difficult to access and to mine and to be able to process it in the cloud. All of it is in cloud object storage. We are experts in dealing with unstructured data in cloud object storage and being able to analyze very easily. And the important thing is this data-driven technical contribution. In Lithops, the data scientist is not provisioning resources. It's just we are just adapting to data volumes and chunking the data transparently to the user, so that the computing is completely automated. And this would be the contribution. And as I said, this is in open source. This can be accessed by anyone, and we have 2 startups and IBM and Red Hat already commercializing it for example, to AstraZeneca to deploy this on-premise on their side using these technologies. And I would finish here with the technical contributions from the Cloud Button project.
Very good. Thank you very much, Pedro and Andreas. So I think we have covered the dots on explaining some technicalities, and I'm very happy to have you here. And just a reminder, so this is a series of workshops that we are organizing in the context of IT market, and thank you also the Data Week for accepting this workshop, because it's important to see and interconnect projects, and I think that this is the best way. So this concludes the part of technical assets and building blocks. We are a bit delayed on the agenda, so we will try to catch up on that, but let's move on with the pilot deployment action plan, or in action. It's just an example, so it's just an example how we are doing it and how our assets and technologies are doing that. So Justina, back to you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And indeed, example from my free market will be presented to us by Carmen Perea Scribanov, Head of Transport Systems and Urban Mobility Unit at Atos, and Dr. Bruno Michel, Manager Smart Systems Integration at IBM. Please, floor is yours.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen for Carmen to start. So can you see the screen?
Yes, we see it perfectly.
Thank you, Bruno. Good afternoon. My name is Carmen Perea. I work in Atos Research and Innovation, and I'm going to present together with my colleague Borja Ruiz the automotive pilot based on the Agora marketplace, and how the i3 market has provided new functionalities to Agora, extending a plethora of new possibilities. After the automotive pilot presentation, Dr. Bruno Michel from IBM is going to explain the well-being pilot. Next slide, please. And Borja, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Borja Ruiz, as Carmen said, and this will be a slide talking about the different pilot projects. So we have 3, one for the SDK core, one for the SDK RI, and the web RI. So in order to ease the entry requirements and fit to all possible user necessities into that free market platform, multiple layers have been developed that will work as a software development kits with incremental levels of abstraction. In the i3 market backplane, API offers all participating data spaces and data marketplaces access to the backplane through these APIs. So this will be the SDK core, the SDK RI, reference implementation, and web RI. And each of them will be expanding and abstracting over the previous one. So for the SDK core, it's a low-level implementation that includes all of the client stuff necessary to connect to the backplane services. And Atos will be developing the automation pilot, which will use the native SDK core implementation. So it will be over its own implementation of the Agora marketplace to expand the services. For the SDK reference interface, it utilizes the SDK core to generate a set of functions that would make i3 Market fully operational from a backend application running it. And IBM will be the ones responsible to integrate the previous solution to i3 Market. And this will be presented later on by Bruno. And finally, we have the Web Array, which will be a pilot implemented by Siemens, which the Web Array will offer a fully functional application with a preset frontend for those who only have available datasets and no previous architecture to deploy. So this provides a frontend which users can modify to adjust their enterprise aesthetics and start using i3 Market in a frictionless way. So with this explained, we'll now proceed to explain Atos implementation with the SDK core module. Will you follow up, Carmen?
Thank you.
Thank you very
next
much.
Slide. Thank you, Borja. Next slide, please, Bruno. Okay, I will continue with a short story about Agora. Agora Data Marketplace is an asset that evolved from 2015 when the development started in the Automat project to develop a data marketplace for 3 leading OEMs. In 2016, the first prototype was tested, and in 2017, it was finalized. This prototype was validated with 4 million of data packets, and later in 2019, Agora was extending in the cross-CPP project in order to open the marketplace, the automotive marketplace, to the building domain. Next slide, please. But shortly, what is Agora? Agora is the Atos data marketplace. It's an open platform that handles the brokering of brand-independent data from the different IoT devices, allowing service providers to create new business-to-business and business-to-consumer data, database products and services. The main functionalities offered by Agora are a seamless and secure experience for sharing and monetizing datasets that come directly from connected vehicles owners riding worldwide or devices in smart buildings to cross-sectorial data consumer interested in accessing an harmonized vehicle and home dataset. The value proposition, to summarize, is a business-to-business data marketplace. In Agora, the providers are speaking the same language, the CIDM. The privacy and secure is preserving. There are full control over data set to whom and for what purpose. The consent for data collection can be personalized, and we provide an open SDK. Next slide, please. And the following question is, why i3 Market? Well, currently, Agora is extending their functionalities thanks to i3 Market backplane, and new capacities are being incorporated. Agora is going to use the services provided by i3 Market to improve its functionalities. For example, the identity provider component by its market provide access to a personal identity wallet. Agora also will make use of the smart contract component for one-to-one contract based on specifics of each data asset, requests, and stakeholders. The data assets component ensure the quality of the services and data assets management. And last but not least, the semantic engines provide Agora with interoperability between marketplaces and or data spaces, and knowledge to open the CIDM model in Agora and collaborate with other standards. Next slide, please. Very quickly, over the scenario of the automotive pilot, this involves the management of fleets and the provision of data to insurance companies. Taking advantage of the improvements powered by i3 Markets, for example, the automotive pilot is able to offer to other Atos solution, the smart fleet, currently under development in the project Infinited, the possibility to ingest more amount of vehicle data from several OEMs providers, as well as open data portal. A smart fleet is collecting data from vehicles in order to pave the way to build artificial intelligence services such as pay-as-you-drive and fraud detection. Yes, next slide. Yes, okay. To finalize the automotive pilot, we are learning from the use of the semantics engine provided by i3 Market and uses to extending the CID model with the new needs and specification. This facilitates the connection with other data spaces and data marketplaces. This knowledge will be used to contribute in the fireware NIGLD model, and Agora can exchange data with other data marketplaces. And thank you for the time. And Bruno, it's your time. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm explaining the particular aspects that we cover in the well-being architecture, in the well-being pilot. So the particular things we are focusing on is providing a service to customers based on IoT data. And the different types are standardized. So we test the system on a first data set that comes from activity of daily living monitoring of elderly. So what is that? That's home mounted sensors that detect how long the people sleep, how long they are active, also toilet use. And so that kind of explains whether an elderly can still maintain the household. And this is important so that one can understand this activity without having to do regular visits, which was also important and underlined during the COVID pandemic, where these visits were more difficult. But there is a standardized approach which can also be applied not only to elderly, but to work safety. We have done firefighter monitoring during firefighter missions, but also in a true healthcare space. But the problem with the true healthcare space is that the regulations is high and the risk is high of course, to lose then private data. I'll explain later how we prevent the use, but during the testing phase, we use simulated data in order to not expose the system. So what we have is we want to build up such systems by purchasing external data from different sources, because building up a solution is a big effort which cannot be handled by SMEs. So we want to combine different vertical silos in order to provide good solutions. And what the solutions I already started. So elderly activity of daily living monitoring, firefighter stress monitoring, but also in a later stage weather let's say inclusion of satellite and weather data, time-based weather data, to be able to provide improved services, for example, to people with lung diseases and so on. So the standardized approach is to acquire sensor data, to learn from sensor data, and to provide then services based on this sensor data. That, of course, requires exchange of data sets as well for training, for example, of artificial intelligence models. And of course, the speciality in the well-being pilot is that we have to respect GDPR conformity. And the approach how we want to implement this with limited data lifetime, because the service provider has to maintain the privacy and will only expose anonymized or even simulated digital twin data to a marketplace. So the whole approach of the well-being aspect is to improve quality of life of people, elderly, of firefighters, reduce risk during a dangerous mission. Then to ensure this conformity with GDPR, we implement a limited data lifetime, which means the data exchange is handled via metadata, and the metadata needs to be free of privacy constrained data. But of course, the sensor data contains sensitive information, and this needs to be subject to GDPR rules, which means that the data owner can withdraw the consent, can require to delete the information, and require to know the information, the stored information in the network. And in order to maintain this integrity, we only provide limited data lifetime, and document the conformity with the get info, delete info, and store the info API interactions. So this was, in brief, the summary from my side.
Thank you very much, Carmen, Bruno, and also Borja for jumping in and contributing to this presentation. I see for now we have no questions from participants. So I think it was indeed very detailed. Maybe it takes a bit of time for our participants to process. And I suppose we can move ahead and try to engage them a little bit more proactively in our last session, together with Susanna Stanke from Siemens and Vasiliki Konyaku from University of Athens. University of Economics and Business, because there is more than one, I suppose. So please, ladies, floor is yours, and I guess you will explain a bit how people should engage now with Mentimeter.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Justina. Vasiliki, are you ready?
Okay, yes, I think we are ready to start.
Perfect. Okay, then now's the time to interact with us. So welcome to the interactive session. So for us, it's very important to really get in touch with you, to get your feedback also. So first, I think we're going to introduce us very quickly ourselves. So I'm Susanne Stanke, and I'm part of technology, the research center of Siemens, and in the i3 Market project, I'm mostly responsible for the smart contract manager and basically securing and enforcing the legal data sharing agreements on the blockchain. Vasiliki, do you want to tell us about you?
Yeah, and I'm Vasiliki. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Athens University of Economics and Business. My field is law and technology, blockchain, data sharing, data trading, and all the legal and ethical parts relevant. And in i3 Market, I'm working with Suzanne on legal smart contracts and aspects of privacy in data sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Vasiliki. All right, so we're going to start with our first interaction. So I am going to share this here. So here we have some instructions for you. So please take your smartphone and maybe scan the QR code, or you can also use your laptop, smartphone, whatever, go on menti.com and enter the code. And so this code here, and if you're there, then please click on the heart, so that we know you're here. Perfect, very nice. We already have 3 participants. Very nice, that makes me very happy that we have people joining, awesome. Okay, I know that we should be around 20 or more than that, so let's wait a couple more seconds so that everyone has time to join. And first, it is very important, since we don't see you and we cannot really directly interact with you, it's very important for us to know our audience, or to get to know our audience a bit. So the first question would be, so I feel like we have already 7, so let's maybe move on to the question. So yeah, which part are you from? So are you from a large industry? Are you a small, medium-sized enterprise, or a university? Okay, so now we have 1 from each of them. Very nice. Okay. Quite a few from, 2 from SME. Very nice. So 6 have voted. 7, perfect. Since we had 7 before, so let's leave it on for 3 more seconds and then we can move on. In case someone still wants to join in. I think that now the majority is kind of, oh no, now it's perfect. Large industry and SME, but also university is participating, so that's awesome. Okay, the first question, now the real question, so this is just like a warm-up, but the first question we want to ask you is, which barriers do you currently identify in the European data market? So we have already talked about some today in the panel discussion, but Yeah, there's lots. So let's see. So this should become a very nice word cloud. So you can just enter some words. So which barriers do you currently see in the European data market? Interoperability. Very nice. We already talked about that, right? ×2. Yeah, that's a huge topic. Overcomplicating things. Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, so we always get the feedback also, how can we onboard on those ecosystems? How can we create a data market? So that makes sense. Security is also a huge point, yes. Fragmentation, lack of expert tech staff from SME side, most probably. Technology complexity in general, right? How can we onboard? No business case, yeah, a typical one. What else do we have? Skills and standardization, yes. That is also a very good one. Perfect. Since we don't have too much time, so we had 6 participants. I think. Oh no one says that. Now we have 7. Awesome. Yeah, perfect. So I think we already have a nice word cloud, and we see that interoperability seems like this is a very huge topic for us today. So that is very nice. So Vasiliki, I think we can jump on lack of federation. I have to include this here. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you very much for participating in the first interactive session. And now we can move on to our, of what we're talking about in this session besides interaction.
Let's have a bit of a discussion. So we had this very interesting discussion at the beginning of this session, so I don't need to say really too much. The last decade, data has become very important, actually more important than ever. The amount of available data has increased exponentially, and so has the reliance of companies on data, as they largely depend on it to innovate their products and services, improve their processes and performance, and also they use it as both as a very, very valuable source of insights, but also as a valuable source of additional income. So it's also a source of revenue. Now, awareness about the benefits of data and data analytics has shifted our technology towards what we call data-driven technology, and we have all adopted different levels of data-driven strategies. So now we also have new promising business models that are essentially premised on data. So the fact that data is the gold, as Martin said at the beginning, or the oil of the 21st century is hardly in question anymore. What is in question is how to share and trade this oil. So how to create a robust and open, fair, trusted marketplace to share this new oil. In other words, creating an ecosystem that will allow the data to be shared in a way that benefits all the involved parties and the economy as a whole remains still a challenge. So far, data trading was less clear and organized, but what are the characteristics of such a fair and trusted ecosystem? In previous workshops and surveys with SMEs, field experts, and researchers, we gathered insights that allow us to narrow down to some specific characteristics that, let's say, make an ideal combination of features a data marketplace ecosystem should have. And these are essentially more or less what you already mentioned, like openness, fairness, decentralization, trust, security and privacy, and both from an ethical point of view and from a legal point of view, interoperability and incentivization, because in order to share data, you need to have what Andreas mentioned earlier, like the mindset to share data, because without participants in the market, then marketplaces are a difficult thing to achieve. Now, let's see how these are reflected upon the IT market vision and implementation. Suzanne?
Yes, thank you, Vasiliki. Yeah, so we already talked about it a bit, or Martin talked about it mostly. And what we are trying to really build in IT market is basically, an ecosystem for data marketplaces and data spaces. And what we did is we implemented such called backplane, which includes services to connect data marketplaces and data spaces, and then also trade the data assets across the marketplaces. And basically it contains everything. You can create an offering, you can update it, you can pay within our ecosystem. We have automated contracting and much more, and especially considering the, by Vasiliki mentioned, properties. And we also have, for example, this one common semantic data model. So this allows interoperability. We have a peer-to-peer data transfer. So we have a separate data access API and SDK so that we can really share our data between provider and consumer, which enables security and privacy maybe even, and especially also the explicit data owner consent in case of personal data. So now it's time again for a second round of interaction. So let's see if I am able to share this with you. No. So you need to scan again a QR code, or you go on menti.com and just enter this code once again. That's a new code now because we don't have the paid version basically. Okay, so one is there, awesome. So I think, yeah, so you can always see this code up there on the slides anyway. So I'm gonna jump directly into our first question. So Vasiliki introduced certain properties that are super important within such an ecosystem for data sharing and trading. So we now want to know which properties are most important for you, in your opinion, obviously, in such an ecosystem. So is it openness and fairness so that everyone can participate, really, yeah, we have a consensus on the policies within that ecosystem? Is it decentralization, that we don't have a third party or authority governing our ecosystem? Is it incentivizing so that, yeah, we do actually get something in return? Interoperability, which we have had already, so that we, for example, all understand what kind of data we are trying to trade. Or security and privacy, which is currently on first place. Okay. The good thing is decentralization is on the third place right now. It's nice. Okay, but it's always changing, so. Okay, yeah, it seemed like it that interoperability is quite a huge topic for us within that round. So that is very interesting to see. So we have 5 participants. Either we lost some, or so basically again menti.com, and you can add the code, enter the code. Okay, 6, perfect. Okay, now security and privacy and interoperability are on one. We're sharing the first place basically. Awesome. And incentivizing is not that important. That's good to know. Okay, perfect. The second question is, we obviously have introduced the concept of i3 Market. So now, since we have quite a few participants from the large industry and also from the SME side, how would i3 Market impact your business? So if such an ecosystem exists where you can share or trade your data, how would this impact your business? Does it have an impact? Hopefully. So let's see, again, we should see a nice word cloud here. Maybe no impact, but also no one has joined so far. So let's see. Possibilities. Yeah, so new business opportunities, most probably. Yeah, okay, very nice. Access to data, yeah, that's it might come from SME side. Just guessing here. Open data, yes. Cross services. Very nice. Yeah, the cross-domain data that is also tackled within i3 Market with our 3 pilots, which we have already seen 2 of them. So this cross-domain data sharing is very important, yes. Awesome, 7 participants. I think that is it. Great. Thank you very much. And now back to our presentation, Vasiliki.
Right, so what we're discussing about like a fair, open, transparent data sharing ecosystems, contracts are an integral part of it. And they set the framework for data trading and data sharing, and they're integral in setting the rules for forming this exchange of data. And it's very important also in terms of incentivizing parties, like it enhances and fosters a trusted environment for people to share their data and for people to trust that the data that they are buying is actually going to add value to their business. In this context, smart contracts have a number of characteristics that may improve the effectiveness of contracts in a way that is highly relevant for our discussion. Smart contracts have specific characteristics because they are premised on blockchain. So as self-executing agreements based on blockchain, they're very relevant and promising for sharing data. For example, blockchain allows not only the automated execution, but also it enables the creation of an indelible trace of steps. It fosters transparency and necessitates clauses that are, unlike to what more legal people would like, more clear and precise. While at the same time, disintermediation and the decentralization of the agreement reduces the costs and the time needed both to reach an agreement, to have a contract, and to access remedies if something goes wrong. Let's see what these characteristics means actually for data trading. So as you can see here, smart contract functions enable and enhance transparency, certainty and trust. And if not, you are not, in case you are not 100% certain about the counterparty, you may trust the system, you may trust the blockchain system that is beneath your smart contract. So that enhances your trust and the sense of security. It also makes access to remedy relatively easier and the entire agreement process easier and less costly. And although that might seem like smart contracts are all rainbows and unicorns, although smart contracts have several merits, they also pose a number of challenges. And when we are discussing about the challenges, it's essential to remember that although we call smart contracts contracts, they're actually not. They are agreements based on blockchain and premised on code. So their nature as automated series of steps, for example, interfere with contractual freedom, an element that is integral in the traditional sense of contract law. And then they also interfere with contractual flexibility. The fact that smart contracts are written in code and not in natural language may make it difficult for contracts to preserve and also reflect the uniqueness of each agreement. Essentially, what makes traditional contracts difficult to replicate is that they reflect the unique agreement, the unique will of the two contractual parties. So both for reasons of flexibility, uniqueness, and contractual freedom, and because it's not always clear whether these contracts actually produce legal consequences outside the digital environment, so whether they're enforceable in the legal sense. Smart contracts have both good and bad sides and a lot of challenges that, as a lawyer, I will give the floor to the technology girl to talk you a bit more about.
Thank you, Vasiliki. Yes, so as Vasiliki mentioned, so obviously smart contracts are not really legal contracts in that sense, but they can support those legal agreements. So now I just want to quickly talk about how we transformed the legal agreements into smart contracts, which is already quite a challenge, right? So we took a sample data sharing agreement from Vasiliki mostly, with as much flexibility and freedom as possible, and extracted the relevant clauses and tried to put them in machine-readable file, right? And it's based on just what we thought we might want to secure and which clauses we might want to secure and enforce on the blockchain. And one example, I think this is a super nice example, that's why I brought it, is the license example. So we have different licenses for our data, and it could be either exclusive, so down there, or it could be non-exclusive. Exclusive, now I'm explaining legal aspects, Vasiliki, but still, exclusive meaning that the data consumer can do whatever he or she wants with the data, and non-exclusive is basically saying we're going to restrict you on what you're allowed to do with the data. I'm going to send to you. And we could here then, for example, say, okay, you are only allowed to analyze it, but you're not allowed to share it with third parties. And what we did, we just put this in a JSON file. So I just brought part of it, and you see, okay, we have license here, we have the exclusiveness is maybe false here, and then you can set which properties are allowed, or which license you want to grant. And this JSON file is basically the basis for the agreement on the ledger. So we created the smart contract manager, which is basically creating an agreement and putting it on the ledger. And based on this agreement recorded on the ledger, we can interact or automatically trigger certain services within our backplane and the data access. So for example, the data access is responsible for the peer-to-peer data transfer, and this component is retrieving the active agreements from the ledger through the smart contract manager, and then checks whether the data provider is or should proceed with the data transfer or not. Then we also have the conflict resolution, for example. So just mentioning two examples here. The conflict resolution is responsible. So if we detect a violation to the agreement, basically within a data transfer, for example, then we can automatically resolve conflicts based on non-repudiable proofs. A certain set of conflicts I have to mention. And this is just, I just want to give a brief overview. If you're interested in more details, you can contact us. You can go on our website, you can write us an email or whatever, get in touch with us, or watch our YouTube videos with demos, with presentations. But before you get sucked into the YouTube hole and just not come out of it anymore, we're gonna have one last interactive session. Let's see. So again, a new code for you, or the QR code. We should have really gotten the paid version. That would have spared you quite a lot of jumping through the Menti sessions. But two are already here, so that looks very good. So again, menti.com and the new code. And we have talked about the legal data sharing agreements already. And the next question, maybe we have lost a few, or you don't want to click on the heart, which is also fine. And the next question is, what are the most important elements of the legal data sharing agreements? So one example could be contractual freedom, as we mentioned before. Could be also elements like, what do you think is most important, like the license part, the data usage policies, whatever you want to share with us and we might not have thought about so far. That would be awesome if you could share. Fairness. So fairness, I assume, Vasiliki, please feel free to jump in, because I'm not the legal expert here, but I assume fairness between the participants.
Fairness of the clauses, exactly.
GDPR compliance, yes. Transparency among all participants, that is good. Equality, yes. Confidential agreements, that's a good one.
It's nice to see how we balance between GDPR, let's say, consequences over data trading and more general issues about the contractual parties. That's very interesting.
Yes. And we have smart contracts in there, which is awesome. Trustworthiness, yes. Yeah, I also like the confidentiality or the confidential agreement. So that is also one aspect we are thinking about. So how can we make the agreements confidential? because we might not want to disclose that we are sharing data with another company or something like that. Legacy and resilience.
Legacy and resilience, an excellent point.
Yes. And decentralization, which comes in handy within our approach. Yes. Awesome. Okay, I think we have 6 participants. One more. What joined? I don't see it. Terms of reference.
We have to speed a little bit, Susan, because we are over the time.
Yeah, I think we have 1 more minute, right? Around 1 more minute. So okay, I think that's already perfect. We have one last question for you. Just what is interesting for us. So what are your learnings from this session? Now, what did you learn? Vasiliki, what did we learn today?
I mean, I have a ton of interesting things that I've noted down.
Yeah, I think we have like lots of very good feedback, and we're gonna go through it for sure. And it's very nice. It's a broad audience also. I really like that. So are there any learnings from your side, audience? No learnings.
Personally, if I need to share my learning, is that key elements such as decentralization are central for all the aspects that we have been discussing, from the data marketplaces to the smart contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, we do need to talk.
For sure, yes. I3 and trusts need talk. It's data space, marketplaces, smart contract not in blockchain. That is an interesting one. Not quite sure what you mean with that. Data ecosystems for SMEs, yes, they are very much needed, I think. Future activities. Yeah, please subscribe to our newsletter also to stay in touch. Perfect. Okay, good roadmap. Thank you. I think that's good. I think that's a compliment to us. Awesome. Solid vision. Thank you very much for this awesome session. It was really fun. And I think then I will hand over back to Justina or Martin, not quite sure.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much for this session, and thanks to our audience who participated and helped you to complete all the questions. It was a lot of fun. Also, a lot of enthusiasm for your part, colleagues. So I want to thank all the speakers, and Martin, perhaps you want to say a couple of last points. I don't want to take any more floor since I know we're a little bit over the time. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Just concluding remarks, and hopefully this will be the takeovers for you. So today we look at these tools for marketplaces from the IT market perspective, from the trust perspective, and cloud bottom. So we will be engaging with more projects, but of course this is the process. So we were looking at these different domain areas, different concepts, and how all of them are contributing to digital transformation, right? Because the central point for us was digital transformation and how we are contributing to that. And the message was for SMEs mainly, but large industries also participate today. So we have this series of business sessions for SMEs. We also have developers, workshop seminars. We have been running this one since 2021 online, and now we are going to do the transition to in person. And we will keep going with this hybrid mode as well. So just keep engaged with us. It's very interesting to interact in this virtual way, but also let's try to make solutions out of these interactions, right? So big thanks to all the people involved and all the participants as speakers, as contributors, also as executors of this day, but also the participants that were with us, and just best wish for the weekend, and see you over the 7 and 8 and 9 in Italy if you are coming to continue with the data week, and also looking forward to meet you in the IoT week in Dublin, to welcome you in Ireland, and then have more interaction. So we're organizing 4 sessions like this in different topics, different aspects over that week. So thank you very much again, Justina, and excellent work as usual. And thank you, everybody. So have a nice afternoon and nice weekend. Bye-bye.